So I'm COO of Kvasir, and I'm responsible for the elements of the business outside of investor relations and investment strategy. My background is actually comes with an AI lens. So I've run a few businesses in my time. Most recently, a big data and AI consultancy, which I set up in 2012 and exited in 2016. So for me, my background is very much around running businesses, AI, data, and how you apply those things in different business contexts.
My name is Martin Oberhuber. I'm the CIO of Kvasir, responsible for trading strategies, development, implementation, and execution. And my background is more of a mix of mechanical engineering, finance, and then high-frequency trading as well. And I guess, always focused on the data science, machine learning aspects of these subjects. And in finance, likewise, I've always worked on machine learning modeling of financial markets, that be it on a tick level for high frequency trading or more like longer term as we do now at Kvasir.
Well, I think we could probably talk for an hour just on that subject alone. I mean, Chat GPT has obviously really heightened everyone's attention on AI again. Even, you know, we had the hype of AI coming through into business back in kind of 2010 and through to sort of 2015, and also that came into finance, and everyone was very excited about the potential. And then it slightly got overshadowed by crypto, but Chat GPT has now really put it back into the limelight, and I think it's a very exciting chapter in the kind of AI and machine learning sphere, and something that we could see coming, but now starting to see in fruition. However, I think it's one that is right at the start of its journey, and I think everyone is playing around with it, trying to understand how it can play a role. And I think that one of the things we really need to be aware of is that it is at the start of the journey, and there's still a little way to go before it can really be making, if you like, decisions for us or helping us make decisions. I think at the moment, from a finance perspective, there are definitely certain ways in which it can make us more efficient, perhaps in research and perhaps in what we develop, but certainly not in investment decision making. Martin, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, you know, for me, ChatGPT or deep learning in general is there are tools for specific jobs, and obviously ChatGPT kind of like revolutionized the space, and for what we do, the immediate improvements that we can see using tools like that is, for instance, when we develop code or even when we do research, it acts like a support tool that allows us to just be more efficient. I don't think at this point that it will replace any developers or researchers, simply because it lacks the ability to, put a lot of things into context, especially when you have sophisticated trading systems like we do. Understanding the entire system holistically is extremely important when you make decisions at the higher level, more abstract level. However, when it comes down to solving specific subproblems, if you, for instance, have a challenge to implement a specific algorithm, ChatGPT can be extremely helpful. And obviously, ultimately, it depends on the researcher and the developers to truly understand the code that it's proposing. But from that perspective, it's already been helpful now, and we soon will see integrations in various different tools such as GitHub Copilot and so on, which will make it even more helpful for developers. From an investment perspective, as Mike was alluding to, at this point, I doubt that it will be able to come up with specific investment strategies that are actually helpful. And also, it can be a quite risky and dangerous thing in that regard, because as an investor, the most important thing is probably understanding the underlying instruments, the associated risks that a certain investment or portfolio brings along with it. And ChatGPT probably is very limited in that ability to, convey these risks or dangers. And so from that perspective, I see it more limited at this stage. I guess in general, it's always a matter of, uh, you being comfortable with using a black box, because these, tools ultimately at the end of the day are black boxes to some extent. Obviously, as a researcher, one can control what goes into it in terms of data sets and even helping it design specific features and tweak the algorithm settings. But for that, one needs to understand how these things actually work. And so one is probably more comfortable at that stage with respect to somebody who doesn't really understand the algorithms. In addition to that, an experienced researcher can actually test the output of these algorithms using out-of-sample testing and also more sophisticated, so like rolling window simulations that are particularly important in finance, understanding overfitting and really making sure that the output that these models generate are actually generalizable for the future. And as novice or non-researcher, these concepts are harder to grasp. And so the danger really lies in the fact that one may think that this is like an easy win and will just blindly use the output that these models generate, for their own investments or other, applications within a corporation.
Yes, I think what would be I think going back to a point that you made earlier on, Martin, particularly around Chat GPT, I think that people who understand or maybe understand the principles of machine learning and AI, but are not experts, tend to kind of think of it possibly or hope it's a silver bullet that's going to solve all their problems or give them this insight out, with very little effort. And I think that one of the key things to remember, regardless of whether we're talking about Chat GPT or deep learning in general or any kind of machine learning technique, is that there is the right, you have to use the right tool for the right situation. For example, you wouldn't use deep learning, for example, or neural networks to look at something where the data set is limited, where you don't have a lot of data. It just would give bad results. And similarly, sometimes for certain parts of the investment process, for example, normal statistical techniques are better than using machine learning in general, for example, or a mixture of both. So I think that the big key takeaway really is that whatever you use, they're just tools that allow you to get better at your job, but you still need to use them in the right way. And from a black box perspective, I think that because we get this conversation a lot, in reality, humans are also a black box, particularly discretionary traders who are making decisions based off of intuition, experience, previous trades. And that decision-making process, looking at the data, what they're seeing in front of them and basing a decision based off their experience, is also a black box. It just happens to be within ourselves. So I think that I think that there's always an element of trust if you're an allocator or an investor around believing in those black boxes. And I think the more work and expertise you have around using them will give you the best results. So I think it's interesting because we always get the conversation around black box and people getting comfortable with that approach, and I think we just talked about that. But I think also with the sort of less sophisticated investor, particularly when it comes to AI and machine learning, rather than necessarily investing per se, we get a lot of investors asking questions like, well, what is it that made the algorithm choose to go long on Apple, for example, and that they're looking for a simple answer, that is oh well, this particular metric was higher and we saw this trend. And actually the reality of finance, whether we regardless whether you use machine learning or not, is that it's there's a lot of non-linear correlations and things to consider that are more complicated than a human brain can really understand. And even when we look at things like farmer French and the factors that people are familiar with, they are simplifications of the reality of why things move, it's something that humans can grab hold of and make it easier to understand. But the reality of the finance is there's way more noise and it's more complicated than that. And then that's where machine learning plays a part. Martin, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, maybe on that last point, I think you covered a little bit the less sophisticated investors with questions like, how do I interpret the signals and so on. The more sophisticated investors who actually understand statistical analysis or machine learning even, they will usually go down to the core challenge of using these tools in finance, which is really dealing with the signal to noise ratio. And so overfitting, so like the practice of fitting to historical patterns but not being able to generalize well, is sort of like the biggest challenge for us in that field. And so they would like to have clear explanations of how we deal with these challenges and how we sort of like measure overfitting, what we do to generalize the models, walk that fine line between underfitting and overfitting the models. And I think those are obviously extremely important aspects that really we as researchers deal with on a daily basis. And to Mike's point, it's absolutely crucial that we use the right statistical technique for the problem at hand. So as Mike mentioned before, when you have very large data sets, such as text data and so on, it absolutely makes sense to use a very sophisticated natural language processing model, such as Chat GPT and so on. However, when it comes down to a lot of financial data, sort of like consist of price data, price information that perhaps you don't have a large history of, and your universe of stocks may be limited for a specific data set. And in addition to that, you don't have many updates or what we call independent samples. And so you end up with actually relatively small data sets very often, and you have to choose an appropriate algorithm. Very often the answer is not deep learning, but more on the side of like using simplistic classical machine learning techniques, even such as linear regression or regularized linear regression and so forth. Yeah, that's a very good question, which we also get as part of our investor due diligence. I guess obviously there's one aspect of doing pure alpha research, which means extracting as much signal as you can from the various data sets, and that is hugely important. And then the second very important aspect is understanding the risks, portfolio optimization, reducing factor exposure, sector exposures to really, in our case, focus on idiosyncratic alpha, but really making sure that you understand exactly what you're trying to extract from the data and from the instruments that you're trading on, and going after that and optimizing the problem with respect to that. And then obviously you have execution as well, which has to be sophisticated and planned in a way that you take into account all the various different aspects that may actually make your research results unreliable, such as implementation shortfall, market impact, execution costs in various different ways, and so forth. And then there's, of course, the aspect that I mentioned before, which is this challenge of overfitting. And we have actually spent quite a lot of time building a sophisticated framework that allows us not only to reduce overfitting as a whole, but also to measure it and really understand what's happening when we optimize specific parameters or hyperparameters, when we do model selection, how does that impact our overfitting overall. And we've come a long way since we started building up that system in a way that gives us a lot of confidence in our results that we see in simulation, that we expect, and obviously in real trading as well.
Looking at what we've learned, when we think about how long we've been trading this strategy, and this predates the fund we have now. I think you always, regardless of your strategy or your asset class that you are trading, or even your method of doing that, you're always going to have environments that suit your strategy and environments that don't suit your strategy. And for the last 3 years, pretty much since the pandemic came, we've had a very different regime and market, and one that has been fueled by major global black swan events on a fairly regular basis. So in fact, in that case, you know, there is not very little history at all that mimics those environments. So you know, one of the challenges of machine learning, of course, is that we try to learn from history. And when you do get a regime change like that, it's very important that you've built robust models that can deal with those changing environments. And that a lot of that is about managing risk and understanding risk correctly. And to Martin's point, that's what we've been focusing a lot on. And of course, when you do have these environments, you also then get a lot of history to work with as well. So for us, you know, whilst these last few years have been, I guess, not the kind of optimal environment that you would expect us to be thriving in, it's been a good opportunity for us to show robustness in the way that we approach investing, and all the work we've done in terms of reducing risk that Martin mentioned before. Yeah, do you know what? Interestingly, I think that Chat GPT, when you think about Chat GPT and all the variations of it, really, we talk about Chat GPT, there are others, and there's you know, ones that are more focused around text, there's ones that are focused around creating imagery, but ultimately they're using the same kind of back end kind of principles and machine learning techniques, and you know, a generative AI effectively. But when you look at those, what they've done is they've created these, if you like, test arenas for a layman or a less sophisticated person to come along and play around. And actually they've been very surprised and amazed at what comes out. And I think that in general has kind of given people another viewpoint on machine learning, which they can relate to. There's like, oh well, it's actually delivered something I've asked it, and that's just a simple question. So I think that has really helped the less sophisticated investor around machine learning to understand that, you know, how it can be applied, the power of it, and that's obviously helped us in conversations we're having more recently. There's definitely we're definitely seeing an increasing interest, and also I think a reduction in people's fears, I guess, around, you know, the black box and AI and what it's all about, because I think they're seeing it in a kind of real world scenario that they can relate to. Martin, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I completely second that. I think it's great for firms like us because it kind of like brings AI to the masses, if you will, and so like people are getting more comfortable with the tools. And I've been asked about how these algorithms actually work under the hood by some of my friends and family who never really, you know, dreamed of trying to understand deep learning, but now seeing how amazing these tools can be and or impactful in their daily lives, they want to understand more how these actually work. And so that's great for, you know, everyone, you know, building these models and so forth. And to Mike's point, in terms of black box, it's really, you know, while these algorithms are obviously a black box, even sometimes to researchers to some extent, it really helps understanding, you know, when you, as Mike was saying, when you ask it a question, it gives you an output, and when the output is reasonable, you sort of like build up the trust. And previously we had similar tools that we had to get comfortable with. Like I would say even you know, a pocket calculator is a black box because normal humans wouldn't necessarily understand how they actually work. But given that they are able to reliably calculate numbers, you trust that it works reliably in other circumstances as well. And before ChatGPT, we had Google Translate, which was a similar tool, obviously also using a deep learning language model under the hood, that people wouldn't generally understand how they work. But given that translations became better and better, people started trusting the tool more and more and were using it despite the fact that it was a black box. And that is true for finance as well. Obviously, we have the ability to test the results, you know, in a scrutinized way to really make sure that the outputs that we get are actually reliable with respect to our backtests and simulations. And an investor, you know, has to take our word for it. However, we also get a lot of requests from more sophisticated investors to deliver a lot of outputs from historical testing from these models that we have, and then they do their own analysis on robustness and overfitting and so forth.
Just, I guess, just to add to what you're saying, like when I think about ChatGPT, going back to that, there is also a risk when you look at trust around, you know, trusting something that shouldn't be trusted. And this is not talking about finance at all, really, but more the general Chat GPT movement. If you couple that with deepfake video creation and the improvements in real-time transcribing speech, sorry, then you couple all those things together and you actually have quite a dangerous tool that allows people to create videos of other people saying whatever they want them to say, and it looks real. So there is this kind of slightly dangerous side to all of this, which, whilst it's exciting, because you can imagine people creating, for example, training courses on the fly, for example, there is this sort of slightly murkier underbelly that says, well, actually people could do some bad stuff with it too. But I think that, you know, we're nowhere near that kind of world when it comes to finance. I think, you know, finance is still exploring how it can be used from a research and from a development perspective. But out in the wild, if you like, with kind of how Chat GPT is at the moment, and social media and marketing and those kind of things, I think it can be quite dangerous as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, if I may, so I think some of these applications are probably a bit further away, but what we are already seeing is ChatGPT can be an extremely powerful coding tool, and there are obviously dangers that people misuse it and ask it to write, you know, whole websites with an entire backend and so on. ChatGPT will happily comply to code that may even run out of the box. However, if you don't understand what the underlying code really does, that could represent a problem. And so and that also ties in with the point of, you know, that a lot of people are making now. Will it replace, you know, software developers or other jobs? And to my understanding right now, I don't think so. Obviously, the level of sophistication and productivity of developers probably will increase quite significantly, because before, perhaps developers were using tools such as Stack Overflow, where you had to copy paste code snippets together. Yet again, you still had to understand the underlying code that you were copying and customizing for your own needs. And now ChatGPT can do the same in a much more efficient way. But again, it's crucial to actually understand what ChatGPT outputs, and there's obviously danger of it being misused here. I guess that is not an easy question, I would say. Well, I mean, first of all, we continue what we are doing already, in the sense of, like, our mission is to really build a product, a financial product that focuses on idiosyncratic alpha and reduces all known, you know, major risk factors. That could be any latent traits in the markets themselves, such as the, you know, commonly known factors such as Fama French or the commercial models, and really focusing on capturing that idiosyncratic alpha of individual stock movements. And that obviously is a very you know, interesting product for our investors, and really where most of our skills come into play. And to do that, I think we'll mostly continue what we're doing in terms of, like, alpha research on various alternative data sets, as I mentioned before, then optimizing and tweaking our factor exposure, sector exposure calculations and risk models, including portfolio optimization, making our models more sophisticated around execution, understanding market impact better, and so forth. And really just, you know, improving on all different aspects of that. We've also come a long way building up research frameworks that allows the researchers to be very efficient in trying out new ideas, and we always keep developing that. So we're you know, simultaneously developing a lot of IP that is just useful from a researcher's perspective. Mike,
Yeah.
is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess, you know, when you look at our kind of philosophy from a strategy perspective, it's around diversification and reducing risk. And I think, you know, through new data sets, we continually you know, create a more diverse portfolio and reduce our risk further and further. And that's what we will continue to do. And what we've seen, you know, other investment managers in the past and currently do very, very successfully. You know, when you look at things like the Rentec and Dalian Fund and others that have almost sort of come into play, done very well, and then 8 years later are now just prop trading because of that success. we're following similar paths to those. I think on top of that, I think we will, what we're starting to see now, and we see this increasing also with all the kind of AI hype, but we have been working with a couple of other investment managers and other organizations who are interested in taking their own strategies and applying an AI overlay where we can work together in a JV sense and start to develop products that can enhance what is already a well-established strategy by taking our AI expertise and applying it in the correct way for that, whether it's credit or fixed income or energy trading or any other vertical, if you like. We're seeing a lot of interesting collaborations, which is very interesting for us as well. One thing's for sure is that when it comes to things like Chat GPT, we are right at the start of the journey with the opportunity that technology presents, and I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how, as it develops, it becomes more and more of a powerful tool for finance. Perhaps moving. I can see how, for example, it can become very soon, in fact, an addition to research products where discretionary managers, for example, will want to research certain stocks or see what's going on with grain in the US, for example, and being able to get a very, very quick snapshot across all different areas because of the power of Chat GPT. And I see how that could be very powerful in the near future, but also could also be dangerous in the sense that until there's that trust that Martin was talking about earlier on, I think that people may end up getting kind of getting caught up in what it's saying and actually stop thinking about what their own experiences and their own intuition. And I think that's part of the journey that we're now going to be going through, which is quite exciting, I think. And we're looking forward to kind of seeing how that progresses and leveraging it when it becomes applicable for us.
Yeah, and perhaps another aspect that we often get asked quite a lot during our investor meetings is around data sets and data research, how we do it, and how we tackle the exploding offerings in terms of quantity of alternative data sets out there. And I think obviously being in the business of using AI and machine learning for finance, it's not just about building the machine learning algorithms themselves, but really do efficient market data research and data analysis. Because as mentioned out there, there's like thousands of data sets out there that are possible candidates for being predictive of stock price movements or movements of commodities, and making sure that as a small team that we currently are, we are using resources efficiently and really going after the data sets that have potentially the most impact is a crucial aspect of what we do. We're doing a lot of market data research before we even start analyzing an individual data set, and then we spend quite some time to make sure that any data set that we may add to our model is actually additive, or what we call orthogonal to the information that is already contained in our existing model. And so from that perspective, obviously it's always important to stay on top of all the offerings and really understand what's out there. And we're looking globally for new data providers all the time to make sure that we're just informed and understand what we may be missing in our current model.